All right. Happy Monday. Let's see. Hope everybody can hear me okay. Hope my levels are all right. He thinks they're okay. I'm going to assume they're all right. Look all right on my end. I can't tell if anyone's in the chat yet. So if you're in the chat and you happen to see or can't see me or hear me but can't hear me, let me know. I'm going to do my contest. So I had a contest running for when I hit 1,000 subscribers. I have hit the 1,000 subscribers finally. So thank you very much. Okay, Elber711 says, sounds good. Great. Thanks for confirming. Had a 1,000 sub contest. I surpassed 1,000 subs. So thank you everybody for that. So I need to collate, calculate, tabulate, merge together some lists of all the emails I have. It will probably take me a day or two just because I've never done it before, never pulled stuff out of various areas. So you still have a couple of days if you want to get in on it. And how you get in on it is I have a newsletter. I'm going to try to get out an update by the end of this month. I don't think I've put out one in June. I don't think. In any case, at Bent Worlds, the link is, you can find a couple places. I will drop it into the chat. The other thing is, if you're a Patreon subscriber, that will also get you in. And I will pull one of those email addresses out of the hat, and I will send them a code for a free version of Worldographer, aka Hexographer 2, that Inkwell Ideas was kind enough to give me a code for. So that will happen sometime this week, so you still have a couple of days. One of the other things that I was able to unlock by hitting that 1,000 subscriber benchmark is I unlocked community features. It just gives me a way to just basically post stuff in the channel. I think, and so what I did was I inaugurated that with a poll for topics for today, and the topic that won was keeping hexcrawling interesting, or talking about how to maintain interest, or talking about, I think it's a big topic that comes up with hexcrawling, is how to keep it from descending into the doldrums, keep interest level up, keep things moving. So without further ado, let's just hop in there. And of course, if you're in chats in various places, just drop messages in and I will try to address them as I can as we go on. And I'm happy, and I'm sure if you've watched any of my other stuff, you'll know that I have no problem in diverting into other topics. Devious Dungeons Painting says, "Grats on the 1K subs. Well deserved. Thank you. Thank you, sir." So I guess the first things first, and some of this is, if you've watched my hexcrawling videos, which are by far the most popular set of videos that I've done, if you've watched those, some of this, I may be repeating myself in stuff that I've said, but those videos are long and they tend to kind of go over a lot of topics. So I also get it if you may have watched those or listened to them sometime in the past and some stuff just went over your head or underneath you or around you, or didn't make it into your brain. I think the first thing that I want to say is, and this pretty much goes with any different element of our RPGs, but I think that we run into problems when we try to fit each element of our game into specific time slots. So if you can imagine you're going through a dungeon, if you as a dungeon master start thinking, okay, I want this dungeon or this level of the dungeon to take the entire session, that this is my idea. I have 4 hours and I've planned in my brain that this 4 hours is going to be totally in the dungeon. That's what I have. Maybe I'm thinking this because I don't have level 2 of the dungeon prepped, or maybe for some other reason, but that's what I have. And that sounds fine. Oh yeah, okay, I'm planning out my session. Great. Well, okay. Well, what happens if the party just beelines through your dungeon? What happens if all these side doors that you thought they were going to go down, they're not going down? If you may have noticed yourself doing this, I know I'm guilty of doing this in the past. Maybe you start to think, oh gosh, they're just speeding through this. And now you start to try to slow things down. Maybe you start throwing encounters in there that weren't scripted or planned or even random. You're just thinking, they're going too fast, so let me throw goblins in front of them. And that could be fine. But over time, maybe they start to become too routine. So suddenly it seems like every 10 feet you're running into goblins because you keep throwing stuff. They're getting through things too quickly. maybe you start to slow down their progress. So instead of just saying, okay, you walk 120 feet, now you're saying, oh, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet. You start slowing down everything. And that just causes, yes, you're watching the clock. You're looking at your watch behind the screen. You say, great. But the experience is dragging. Now I'm talking about dungeons, but I think this applies even more so to the wilderness, because you can get that same thing. If I have my party and they start this session and I know they are leaving to go across this county to the big city, and I've decided in my brain, okay, I want them to be arriving at the big city at the end of the session, so that at that moment I can present some kind of cliffhanger that I have planned, some kind of narrative moment that I want to leave them on, and I'm going to say, okay, great. End session, right? I'm going to have this big moment where they're going to get to the gates and something's going to be happening, and I'll get to go end scene and see you next week. And everybody will be going, oh, I can't wait to see what happens, right? That's what I have in my brain. So I have them as Hexcrawl, and I know, okay, they've got to go 2 hexes, say 12 miles, give or take, more or less. And okay, that's going to take them X amount of time in the fiction, and then I'm going to sprinkle some stuff around these hexes, and they're going to, there's going to be this old fort that's strange noises are going to be coming from, and there's stuff in there that I want them to experience and them explore. And they're going to be maybe some bandits on the road, and they're going to take some time dealing with that. And there's going to be this other thing, and they're going to take some time dealing with that. And I put all this stuff together in my brain. I've said, great, between those encounters and whatever, they're going to take 3 hours to get over this, and that'll put them right where I want them to be, right when I went. Perfect. But then they don't decide to go to the tower. They don't decide to confront the bandits on the road. Perhaps because of reasons in the fiction, they understand that there's urgency for them getting to this city. They don't want to mess with any of that stuff. And even if that stuff doesn't impact them in terms of in fiction timing, dealing with the fort maybe takes them a couple hours. If they were to explore that area, dealing with the bandits in fictional time maybe only takes 10 minutes less, depending on what they do. So it's not like the fictional time changes, but the party's focused. They want to get to the end. So now as the game master, what does that leave you with doing? Maybe you start to describe stuff in detail. Now, instead of saying, okay, it's lunchtime, you guys have made it so many miles. Now you're going, okay, you're in the woods and the trees. And do I have some kind of thing of trees? Oh, and these seem to be maple, and you're moving another 10 feet. Oh, there's a spruce. Ooh, spruce. Right? You start to slow things down because you're thinking, oh goodness, I gotta get my time back. I think this is just a bad way to start. I never try to think about how much game time of us playing, as opposed to fictional time, is going to be spent on the Hexcrawl. The benefits of having all your Hexcrawl tools set up is that once you have all your tools, whatever you're going to use, tables, if you're overloading dice, whatever your overloading dice methodology is, all that stuff, your random encounters, all those, whatever it is you've got set up, then no matter how often they go back and forth between these areas, you don't have to worry about it. You can just worry about, okay, I have this Hexcrawling set up, so as long as they're in this part of the world where I have my terrain set and everything, I don't need to prep anymore there. All I need to now worry about is what's in the big city, what's going on over there. So that if they decide to not take any of those little hooks that I've put in the Hexcrawl there, the old fort and the bandits on the road, or if they decide to ignore all those, it's fine with me, because I'm not betting anything on them doing it. I'm not putting my eggs in that timing basket. You want there to keep a flow. Let's see. Frederick says, let them finish it. I have the tools to throw something together on the fly. Yes. So that's a very interesting, or not interesting, it's a very good point. Right. And this is definitely going to be dependent on what kind of GM you are, how comfortable you are with sort of improving things. I think Hexcrawling improv is always your ability in improv is always going to help you as a GM, because there's always going to be stuff that you're going to need to do on the fly, right? Even in the very micro part of dealing with particular player actions in a moment and the consequences of those actions and describing those actions and all that stuff, right? It requires improv on many different levels. If you look at it, like, okay, stuff's either going to happen or it's not, and I have stuff wherever they're going. I'm going to have stuff. If they don't go somewhere, that whatever, that's fine. You're going to feel a lot more relaxed about that hex crawl. You're not going to try to force them down a path they don't take. I've seen a lot of stuff where people would say, well, I think that just every hex there should be an encounter because X or Y reason. And, my answer is why? You're turning your hex crawl into a monster corridor. You want your players' decisions to make sense. You want that if they have an urgency as a party to get as fast as they can to that big city on the other side of the county, you should honor that by letting them go. The last thing you want to do is slow them down either in the fictional game because I don't even know why, because you want it to take longer, or in the meta game of thinking, well, I don't want them to be there in 5 minutes of gaming time because I'm not ready for them to be there yet. Set up your hex crawling stuff in advance. That way you'll be ready for the hex crawl part automatically. And then you can spend your prep time on that important stuff, on the big cities or those big set pieces or whatever you want to have there. Get your hex crawl stuff set up so that you can just move. I usually have like a check-ins, I guess is what maybe I would call doing it. I do a kind of a check-in when they hit like lunch. I mean, this is assuming that no encounters take place. So if the party leaves in the morning and they're going, obviously they have to be going a distance that would keep them on the road by the time they've the halfway mark of the day, basically. I'll do a lunch check-in. And what I will try to do is describe, and really you want to describe, this is your chance to really describe, not the lore necessarily, but your world building. You've set up all this stuff. Here's your chance where they're walking around to describe it. But you know that, and if you've ever timed yourself, the amount of time it will take you to describe probably everything you want to say about the area is only going to take a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes of actually speaking. If I want to say something like, and as the road, you feel the grade sharpen as you leave the fields and the flowers of the plains behind you, and you start entering a more rocky, rugged, hilly terrain. In the distance, you can see the lowest peak of the mountain range, the Fang Mountains. You can see behind it that there are higher peaks that are shrouded in clouds and mist. Somewhere in the distance, looks like circling one of those lower peaks, you see a winged creature of some type, but it is far away and too indistinct for you to discover, for you to determine what sort of creature it is. The smells of the wildflowers and the wild herbs of the plains is slowly being left behind. There's a more alpine wind sort of blowing in from the peaks down at you. It adds a little bit of chill to the air. I don't know. I didn't time myself, but that probably took a minute or two, and maybe I could have stretched it on. I could have engaged more of the senses. I could have talked more potentially about if the soil changed, if there were any other feelings in the air, if it seemed like they were moving into a more dangerous area. I could have spent a little bit more time, but even if I really stretched it out, it's five minutes. Let's see, Frederick says, cute, cuddly encounters can take years. It took this group I had one time 2 sessions to get a kitten out of a tree. One of them fell to his death. That must have been some kitten, and it must have been some tree. Yeah, you could do a lot with encounters. My point is really that you can't force the party to engage in your encounters, and you have to live with the fact that they may ignore your encounters. And we know that's true of everything. We know that's true of plot hooks. We know that's true of everything. But I think with hex crawls, we can get sucked into this idea of how much meta time they're going to take. And from a descriptive standpoint, I could say everything I want to say in just a couple minutes. So then anything beyond that is going to kind of start to drag. As a player, I'm going to be thinking about, well, what are the important things in these things that I'm saying? In that 5 minutes of narration, I've probably hit on all those important things. If I continue just to go on and on, especially if your party is really interested in where you're going, they're going to want to start to get where you're going. So I will then check in kind of, okay, it's lunch. Here's what the terrain is like now. Here's what your situation is now. You're stopping for your lunch break. And it's up to them if they decide, well, we don't want to stop for lunch. We're too much of a hurry. Okay, fair enough. I'll start to talk about, hey, you might start to get exhausted or tired and what that might mean for you. But generally speaking, if they don't say anything, I say, okay, you guys all stop for lunch. Then we can kind of reset what's going on, reset the new terrain. If they have entered a different terrain, kind of reset all those things and then then I will go to the next one, which is, okay, night is falling. What do you do? So depending on how much is going on, this can be a long process. Maybe they run into an encounter, and that encounter could snowball into a bunch of other stuff. And that morning part of it, that morning segment, could be long, or it could just be that 5 minutes that I just gave you. Okay, I've narrated. The next thing I would say after that, the cold alpine air hits your nostrils. There's maybe you see there's a howl that seems to reach your ears. Maybe it's just an echo. You're not sure. The ground seems less fertile here and crumbly and pebbly, whatever, right? Then I'll say, okay, now after a few hours, it's lunch. The sun is X high in the sky. It's either sunny or it's cloudy. It's raining or it's going to rain, whatever, right? All that stuff is happening. Now it's lunchtime. Any changes to what you guys do? Are you changing your approach? I can ask those questions, or they can ask those questions. We can get that out of the way. Let's see. Nothing in the chat. Having something interesting in 1 out of 4 hexes increases the feeling of discovery. There's something in every hex. There is less uncertainty. Yes. And the other thing is, when you have something, it feels it's going to depend a lot on the area you're in. This is where you have to be. Remember, you want to keep your setting in mind with all this stuff. If you are in a forlorn, lonely wood, there shouldn't be something everywhere you turn around, because then it's not a forlorn, lonely wood. It's crowded. If you're in a place that is full of farmlands and it seems to be full of people or other creatures, whatever it is, it's crowded, there's a large population, then it may be more warranted to have something. And the other thing is, remember that what's interesting to one person may not be interesting to the other. As a GM, I think, oh, this old fort is interesting. My party's like, no, that's a death trap waiting to happen. We are passing that by. Oh, bandits in the road? No time for that, sir. We're going to take to the wild and just circle wide around them. Right? And then me as a GM, I'm going, well, geez, I had all this interesting stuff planned, but they don't know that. They don't know what's in the old fort. They don't know what secrets I was going to reveal to those bandits. So they're just gonna pass it by. So yeah, you want to space out if you having set adventures or set. I like to think of it as points of interest, almost like a GPS. When you have your nav, or you have I forget whatever nav you use, and it'll say, here's a point of interest. Like, I think it was points of interest. You may pass it on by, you may go explore it, but I'm not counting on you doing it either way. But as a GM, you just have to live with that uncertainty. If you don't have a bunch of stuff scattered around, then live with the fact that what you thought would take them 4 hours of gaming time to get through from A to B is just going to take 5 minutes. Let's see. Richard Smithson says, what tables do you use to generate hex content on the fly? I use a whole combination. I will try to drop in links. There's Hex Describe. I don't know if it's hex-describe.com. They do some random stuff. What was it? Abulafia or Alubafia? I don't remember the name of it. I think it's down. It was this whole great kind of wiki-esque selection of tables that could generate all kinds of stuff. I know it was named after, I think, a medieval Arab philosopher, I think. Abulafia, but I think it's down. You can still access the site, but all the tables are non-functional. I have the ready reference sheets from Judges Guild that I like to use. They're great, but I don't want you to, please don't go buy the Judges Guild stuff, because Judges Guild it's run by some bad actors at this point. So I would send you elsewhere. There are definitely some good Hex resources on DriveThru. I will try to dig some up and post them in later. Oftentimes what I will do is, if that stuff, so one thing you could do, and I guess I can talk about what I did in my game last week, because this came up, is you can, if you're rolling for a random encounter, let's say, don't just think about it in terms of the monster, but think about it, what it says about the terrain, the micro terrain. And the Ready Reference Sheets has some nice stuff where it talks about kind of these sort of not a major enough feature that it would be the hex type, but sort of minor feature. So inside woodland, you might find a ravine. It's still overall a woods hex, but there's a ravine there. You might have a desert hex, but it's got a little oasis there. It's not enough that it's going to change the hex, but it's there. In this case, my party is following this river through these hills. And I was rolling up a random encounter, and I got troglodytes, essentially, was the creature. Troglodytes are usually, and I was using the BX version of, I think it's in the basic part of BX, the basic kind of troglodyte. They're found in caves usually. So what I did was I kind of riffed on that, and what the encounter ended up being was I talked about how the river opened up into basically a little bit of a swamp area. I started referencing the horrific smell that they kind of passed through, a sort of almost a barrier of the air, and the smell just got horrific. And the troglodytes, that's one of their things. They have this, I think it was troglodytes, they have this horrible smell about them. I put this massive kind of mud, sort of mound of just, it was made of mud and various detritus and bones and skin and hide and everything, just all just mad together in this kind of mound. And I put these troglodytes inside, essentially living. I just took beavers basically as an inspiration for these, and I didn't. None of my players really know most of the D&D lore anyway, and I didn't call them troglodytes. I think I said they were kind of crocodilian in nature. I don't know if the troglodytes are kind of, at least in the BX, if you look at the drawing, they're sort of lizard men. But I made these more aquatic, more crocodilian, reptilian in those ways, and I ran it like that. So in this case, the details of this hex didn't come from me rolling on a hex table. It came from me getting this thing on this random encounter and then deciding, well, how do these troglodytes make sense in this setting? I'll just mix it up a little bit, and I came up with that. I could have easily done something different. They're in hills. I could have had caves. I could have done something else, but for some reason, it just spoke to me in that moment. Well, I didn't really want to do caves for whatever reason. Just in that those seconds when it just, okay, this is what I've got. I was like, I don't want to do caves. Oh, maybe it could be this. And so I did that. So in this case, you had a random encounter roll informed these micro features of this hex. So that's what I did. You can use many different methods. Like I said, I'll throw some tools in there. Now, when I put those guys there, I could have just rolled for distance and just kind of started it. They say that the at least the initial troglodyte lures, they basically tack on site, that kind of thing. Well, I decided not to do that. I basically put them inside their house. And then I waited to see just if the players would engage or not. And if they would have gone around it, that would have been fine. I would have been maybe a little bit disappointed in a way, because I thought it might make an interesting encounter. And actually, I wanted to sort of give them a shot at getting some loot. I wanted to put some. They felt bad about themselves, really, about their inability to track down some of the loot in some of the dungeons. So I'm not just going to throw stuff in front of them, but I thought, like, I can make this a lair encounter. I could just put the troglodytes and had them wandering around the rivers, and they'd have to find their cave, which I might do something similar to that later. This one, I was like, let me put this lair out in front of them. I think that's part of what inspired me to do this kind of hut thing. Is I wanted to give it sort of a lair, give them an opportunity to see what they could do with that. And it ended up being a fun encounter, but I had to live with the fact that this encounter being made, they may skip around it. And if so, then I got just going to fast forward, essentially. I think really the ultimate thing is if there's nothing going on, fast forward. If you find yourself saying, well, I can't fast forward for reasons other than there are things actually going on in the game, then you need to rethink why you're doing the hex crawl, kind of like what the hex crawl thing is for. Because to my mind, you're hex crawling for the sense of distance, the sense of discovery. I think as somebody mentioned there, that being able to showcase your world to the players and really show how potentially, how things are happening in the world affect that world. If it's in the middle of the campaign and the players have been doing amazing things, how those amazing things may have affected the world. Gets you show the width and breadth of your world, but that can be very quick. If you're using it as I need to eat time sort of maneuver, I think you're going to get into trouble. Anytime someone says to you, if you were to go and stand up and say something, right, at a bachelor party, a wedding, whatever, someone says, hey, go make a speech. And you may be able to do a couple minutes. Now somebody says, you got to take 10 minutes. We need 10 minutes. It gets tough. Some people are going to be able to do that. Some people are going to sit up and say, give me 10 minutes, give me 10 seconds. I can fill it regardless. But for most of us, it's going to be a struggle. And what you want to do is, as a GM, you're the one that's really dictating how much time that needs to take. In that scenario I just gave out, somebody's telling you to take up 10 minutes. You're the GM of the game. You don't need to tell yourself to take up 10 minutes if you don't have 10 minutes worth of content. If you're moving days and days and things are happening, then sure, that might take up more time, but again, it could end up being fast. If I'm rolling for encounters, and I've often sat there and rolled, and I roll probably a little bit more than maybe the original old school rules, but not as much as I've seen other systems roll. I roll random encounters pretty much once per day or night when you enter a hex or the hex. Yeah, entering a hex. So let me say that probably sounds a little bit. I don't know if that's clear. Let me try to clear it up. If you're starting off in a woods hex and it's morning, I'll roll for an encounter to see what's going on in that woods hex. But I will also roll if you're at night or the evening and you go to camp. I'll roll again, and I don't know. I just like to do that because I feel like it gives that nice kind of diurnal versus nocturnal stuff. There's some stuff that's going on during the day. Some of those same things will be at work at the night. Sometimes different things will come out in the night, and I just like to do that. But I'll use one for the day, one for the night. Now, if you were in that woods hex, you cross over to the next hex, I will roll again because you're in a kind of a different area. So I feel like other stuff's going on, even if it's still a woods hex. It's maybe a different territory, something going on, right? So depending on how fast you're moving and all these different factors, I may end up rolling probably not more than 3 times or 4 times. I mean, I suppose if you're super fast traveling and you're just grinding through hexes for some reason, that might create a bunch of rolls. But generally speaking, at the kind of normal travel pace, at least at low levels, it's probably max 3 rolls in a single day night cycle, right? Once for the day, once for the evening, and then if you made it through the borders of one hex during that time, maybe one additional roll somewhere in there. So not a ton of encounters going on. I tend to do the kind of 1 out of 4 hexes of something interesting. Again, depending on what's going on, I really look at that. What do I want my setting to feel like, or this part of the setting to feel like? If I want it to feel very lived and inhabited, then there's going to be more stuff. If I want it to feel very lonely and vast, then I might not want that. I might want a lot less than that, maybe even less than 1 in 4. If you're in a giant desert region, I want to really showcase that vastness of the desert and the desolateness and the fact that there's very little life there. I don't want you running into a lot of stuff. But again, it's setting dependent. If I want to talk about, well, there's an old civilization that used to live in the desert when it wasn't desert, maybe I want to have all those things popping up. I want to show you crumbling towers that are jutting out like bones from the sand. Maybe a ruined aqueduct or a section of an aqueduct that's overhead. Those kinds of details. It's not necessarily an encounter, though there might be stuff there, but I want to add that flavor in. And we're talking about interest level overall, because I've been really, I guess, up to this point, I've been concentrating mostly on, hey, don't force time, because the more time you have to fill, the less interesting it's going to seem, because there's only, unless you're J.R.R. Tolkien, you probably can't wax on for hours and hours about the trees. You're going to end up repeating yourself or just kind of running out of stuff to say. And then your players could be wondering, why aren't we making better progress when you're just kind of looking at them and they're looking at you? And I've been in a situation where you're just looking at the GM and you're like, okay, we keep moving. Or, as the GM, you're kind of, for some reason, you're waiting for the players to tell you, okay, we keep moving, even though it's obvious that they're moving because there's no reason for them to stop, but you're just kind of waiting. But the other part of being interesting is having all these details, having things at the ready. A lot of stuff. This is where all that world building stuff, if you love to world build and you've been doing reams and reams of world building, this is your chance to throw all that stuff in there. Obviously, it has to be stuff that's observable, but this is your chance to, this was this ancient thing used to be here. We'll talk about it. Well, how does that ancient thing affect the landscape? Maybe it's not totally visible, but there might be traces, old stone roads that are mostly buried under dirt and grass, but here and there, some of the cobbles peek out. Columns that are broken, all kinds of stuff out there. Let me hit Elburst 711 says, I roll on the table every hex. This can generate ruins, weather changes, monster layers, caches of goods, nothing at all, etc. My main, quote, wandering encounter, unquote, encounter check is rolled once per day. Yep. I mean, really, it's about finding that thing that works for you. I usually roll those things separate, the ruins and everything, because I like to have potentially multiple things. I do kind of do it a little bit less mechanically than other things, where I'll kind of like a feel for it. And this is where I might be thinking about, even just things in terms of, well, I named this forest the Forest of Dread. So what is dreadful about the forest? And sometimes, and I don't know if this happens to you, it certainly happens to me, I'll name it. This is a cool name, the Forest of Dread. And I don't really do anything else with it. And then suddenly my party, for whatever reason, is entering the Forest of Dread. And all of a sudden I think about, oh, why did I call this the Forest of Dread again? Well, I better think of some dreadful things to throw in the forest. But yeah, I mean, you got to find whatever's going to work for you. And the other thing you have to do is you have to read your players. Some players are going to be very much into hex crawling and doing that discovery stuff. Other players are going to be there. I just want to get from A to B. And that's really what the hex crawling, the purpose is, right? Players, the party doesn't hex crawl just to hex crawl. I mean, I suppose they could, but just aimless wandering. There's a goal in mind. Find someone, find something, get to someone, get somewhere. And there's a time limit involved. And you should almost feel flattered as a GM, if your party is seeing stuff come up and thinking, "Ooh, that's interesting, but we don't have time. Mark it for later because we gotta go because we need to be at that place at that time." Those are really good qualities. You want to honor those qualities. So you got to kind of read the situation. You got to read your players. Some players, they're going to want to be whatever they decide the quest is. They're going to want to focus on that quest, and you can just keep throwing stuff all over the place, and they're just gonna be like, I just want to get to the quest, and that's fine. And if you have a bunch of players that are quest focused in that way, then spending a whole lot of time or energy on the hex crawling portion of your adventure may not be the best use of your time, because your party's not going to engage with them unless you point them directly at it. You want them to go and investigate that ruined fortress? Well, you better point the game at the ruined fortress and say, there's a necromancer in the ruined fortress, get him. And then they're off. But if you're going to plant the ruined fortress on the side and they're going somewhere else to deal with the ogre, they're not going. So, don't bother with it, or just use it as flavor. There's a ruined fortress over there. What's there? Nobody knows. And then if they bite, and they don't, they don't. Let's see. John Cartwright says, true, you have to be able to read the room when you're the DM. Yes. And this is stuff you can kind of try to get a jump on it in your session 0. You can try to ask your players, if you're well aware, hey, we have these different elements in the game, right? We have dungeon delving, we have exploration, we have socializing. You know that, then you could ask your players going in, both their characters and the players, because some things are going to be character driven. I am playing, I don't know, Marco Polo, the explorer. Okay, so exploration is part of my character goals. Great. And then as a player, I like to explore. That's what I want to do. There's a good marriage. Some other people are going to have, I am Shirley Temple the Templar, and I'm trying to find my lost brother. I'm focused like a laser beam. If my Templar knew what a laser beam was, to go get my brother, I care about nothing else. And then as a player, what do you like? Well, I like to accomplish my character goals, and I like to do something else, whatever. Okay. Use your session 0 to find as much of that as you can, but keep in mind that one session 0 isn't necessarily going to lock everything in for everybody. What happens is people change. I may think, hey, I'm playing Marco Polo the Explorer. Great, I'm going to go out exploring. I play a couple of sessions of that, and I don't take to it. I don't like it. I want to do something else now. I thought I was wanting to explore, but I don't. It turns out I really like dungeon delving, and I like that type of exploration as opposed to exploring the wilderness. It's going to happen. If you're playing with newer players, they may not know what they want. They may say they want exploration, but then they don't. So you can't look at it and say, well, just because I had session 0 a month ago and they all said, everyone gave a triple thumbs up to exploration, that they still like it, right? So it's something that you need to keep an eye on. If you're playing in person, I know it's easier than if you're playing online, remotely, but keep an eye on kind of how are they feeling about hex crawling. Some, like I said, some players really will get into. I know my current players kind of got into the logistical parts of it, how much food they're bringing, the horses they're bringing, their hirelings they're bringing, all this stuff, and kind of doing that. Some people are going to be like, I don't care. I just buy as much rations as I need. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. Right. So keep that stuff in mind. Know that it's not going to be a single answer just because you session 0'd it. However long ago, it may change. So be be flexible to that, and part of that can be giving them alternate options for travel that may be faster, easier, safer. They can take the King's Road, which is safe, or they can go through the hills. Going through the hills, the Troll Hills, will save them multiple days of travel, but obviously there are trolls potentially there. But taking the King's Road is safer. And if you take the King's Road, you don't really need to roll on the encounter table, because it's a well-traveled path that is completely mundane. Or maybe you have different encounters set up for that you want to potentially throw at them that can give them different things. But be flexible. Maybe you want to give them, at some point, you realize that you're bouncing a lot of places on the map, but they're not interested in the travel. Could they find a kindly wizard, or could they find an old teleportation circle they could use, or a way that they could take in some kind of ethereal portal or some other way to cut the travel short? Obviously, it doesn't work for every setting, and I'm not suggesting you just gift player stuff, but it is a game. If they don't like hexcrawling, then don't force the issue. At the end of it, I feel like oftentimes the GMs, we get caught up in this kind of simulationist thinking, and I totally get there a lot. I'm not a GM that will be like, he likes to use polearm, so in the next chest there's going to be a magic polearm because that's what he likes. Like I don't like that. Even as a player, I don't like it, because I don't feel like stuff's just being gifted to me. I remember one time I was playing a game with a thief, and then the guy told me after the fact that we found this, I forget what kind of cloak it was, maybe some kind of elven cloak or cloak of something or other, and that he'd given to me because I was the thief or something. And I just was like, I thought that I'd kind of just gotten that, whatever. It's just, I don't know, maybe that's me. But while, yes, it's fun to delve into simulation of things, it's a game. And if my party turned around and we hate hexcrawling, I would try to figure out a way so that we can keep playing, rather than saying, nope, we're just going to keep hexcrawling because it is what it is. I will try to figure out what works in my setting that might work for them. Either there could be a lot of stuff closer to home, or maybe they can unlock some other way. But I want to keep it going. So yeah, read the room, be flexible, take advantage of any and all tools, and what speaks to you. Some things are going to speak to people more than others. If describing the landscape and that stuff is not something that you like to do, you're interested in, comfortable doing, skip it. Stick to the stuff that is interesting, that you really get fired up about. Maybe for you as a GM, it's not going to be the trees or the ground or the smells. And while it's great to describe those, and while you'll see a lot of advice talking about hit all 5 senses, do all those things, I tend to think that while that stuff is great, and if you can use all those tools, because they are useful and they are immersive and they will help players get as completely into a locality as they can. If it's boring to you, if it's a struggle for you to do, I just guarantee it's going to come across as boring to your players and a struggle for them. So what is interesting to you about these areas that they're going through? Talk about that stuff. If you really get fired up about these ruins of an ancient civilization because you spent a whole lot of time filling in the story of it and doing it, then get into those details. Think about what about that stuff is cool or remarkable or different. And a lot of that stuff will translate to the PCs. If I really go into like all these things about how this arch that's just standing in the middle of nowhere, interesting things about the marble, maybe it doesn't seem to have, it seems to be almost like as if it's still new, but it's just kind of alone. There's strange script, and maybe it glows a little bit and it catches the sunlight in it, and the sunlight tends to ripple along the surface or follow along in the veins of the marble. Wow, it's going to captivate them, I think, because it captivates me. So I would stick with that stuff. You got to go with the stuff that speaks to you. A lot of advice, again, is going to go into, do these things, do that things, hit all the senses. Yeah, that stuff's great. But think about how you can do that in terms of things that you like. Another thing that you can do is don't make your setting bigger than it needs to be. Oh, let's see. Hold on. John Cartwright says, the more you get to DM and build on the SO, It could go a long way to having a campaign not just die out in a few sessions. Yeah. Oh, session 0. Yes. Right. The more, yes, as far as session zeros go, the more you GM, the more you kind of understand everything. It will help you hit all the points you need to hit in session 0. That's absolutely true, because that mismatched expectations will haunt you. Getting back to what I was saying, don't build a Hexcrawl or a Hexed area that's too big for you. This maybe actually is sneakily important. If you don't want your party, or you feel like it's boring, or you're going to struggle with making it interesting for your party to travel leagues and leagues and leagues and leagues between these two places, don't put them leagues and leagues and leagues and leagues away. Err on being small. There's nothing wrong with it being a small area, right? I think I mentioned in a video not that long ago that a 6 mile hex is like 36 square miles, which maybe in the modern age doesn't sound to a lot. We're like, what's the big deal? That's a half hour for me in the car. That's a lot of area to cover in one hex. I think, and I think in those other videos, same video I talked about, Skyrim. I think the entirety of Skyrim fits basically into a 1 6 mile hex. I know there's some, I looked into a little bit, and there is some like funkiness to the way it works, but essentially, you don't need to build. John Carver says, be flexible, build what you need. Exactly. You don't, I know we want to have these massive Middle Earth or giant just spaces, and we want to make everything epic and huge mountains spanning across and everything. And they're going to go from one coast, they're going to have to go all the way to the other. But that becomes an anchor around your neck or your ankle, when now you have to describe all those things. And now when you've said, okay, we're in the fantasy version of New York, and we need to get to the fantasy version of California, and I got just hundreds, thousands of miles that I need to try to fill. How do I fill that? Well, there are tools, and I've talked about some tools, but the other thing is, don't put yourself in that spot. Give yourself a small area with that you can make interesting, as opposed to here's a blank canvas and let me figure out how to make it interesting. No, just go with here's a small area of space, and there's a lot of interesting things in there that we can talk about. And then this is where I'm going to plant everything, and then I will grow it out from there. Right? I think I did a video on, right? I think I called it, radial, taking a small radius and slowly building it outwards. Concentrate on making a small space interesting and letting the party move around that space, then making a huge space and then having to try to backfill the interest into it. Can it be done? Yes. Does it take a lot of effort? Yes. Because even, one of the things, and again, I think I am repeating myself from earlier videos, but not everybody watches everything, but I played in a Electric Bastionlands campaign. It didn't last very long, but one of the things that happened was we were tasked with, okay, go figure out what's happening in these sewers. This was in a city, and it's kind of a steampunkish sort of, I don't know, kind of mixed fantasy kind of thing. So there was some stuff that was more modern, but there were obviously a lot of fantasy elements. And I guess I haven't really read the books. I wasn't the GM, I was a player. And I guess there's there's guidance in the GM to kind of make everything interesting. But what ended up happening was I felt like every block we walked in the city, just something crazy was happening. So it felt like I was in Toontown, and it was like, oh, this is happening. Oh, this is, if you remember Roger Rabbit, the movie Roger Rabbit, when the PI goes into Toontown, it's just like every step he takes, something else wacky kind of happens, and something wacky was happening. And it was just pulling me out of it. And I think at the end, I kind of said exasperatingly, I think the GM asked me sort of how it was going, whatever. So I think he was using this to sort of test out the system. And I was a little bit exasperated. I was like, I just want to get to the sewers. I just want to get to where the game is. Like, this other stuff is not interesting to me. It just seems like filler. It seems like you're trying to, for whatever reason, trying to prevent us from getting to the adventure. So there are these roadblocks. They just weren't fun. Like, one of them would have been okay, maybe 2 of them, but then it was like, there's like 5 things happening, and it just was too crazy. That can happen. I don't care what kind of amazing tables you have. If every time I pass some second of time, I'm hitting something else wacky, I'm going to be, first you hit a ravine, then there's a massive waterfall, then there's a mountain filled with sludge, then there's this other thing. You know what I'm thinking is like, why am I on this road? Is there not anywhere just flat and plain I can get to? I don't want something everywhere I turn. I'm trying to make progress. Why is all this stuff happening to me? what's here? Let's see. John Carver says, as your campaign grows, so does the world. You and the players building together. Yeah, build it out together. 6 Mile Hex is huge. And one benefit, I think, of starting off small, that I don't know if it gets talked about a lot, is that it lets your players get a feel for it, get comfortable, start to understand where things are. They really get a lay of the land that I think it adds to their enjoyment. I think, and it adds to their ability to process things in the world, because they will start to understand. If you have two cities, A and B, and what's happening A, and you can hear your players going, okay, it's going to take us half a day to get to B, and then we can do this. Right? It's wonderful to see, because you see them really embedding themselves in the landscape, because they get to spend time there. They get to understand it. They get to be in one place long enough where they get to learn some NPCs' names, make some relationships, find their places there. This is all valuable stuff. You don't need to rush them and say, okay, now go all the way to the opposite side of the map to get this thing. And I've seen GMs, post questions about this stuff. They're in this place, and now I need them to go all the way across the map to this other place and then come all the way back. Why? Why are you forcing them, putting this on yourself? Now, I know there might be story reasons, but I don't have much sympathy for the story reasons, because if I'm writing the story, and I like to be very, as you may not know if you've watched a bunch of my stuff, I like to be very light on the kind of story, but whatever I have put into whatever the story is, until it's actually come out at the table, it's just potential. So maybe in my mind, the party is in fantasy New York, and they need the goblet of gobletry in fantasy LA. They don't know it yet. When they go to the quest giver, and the quest giver is about to tell them, and I'm looking at them going, I'm not ready for them to go all the way across country like that. You know what? Quest giver could tell them it's actually in fantasy Boston or fantasy Philadelphia, places that are much nearer and are much more manageable for me. It kind of goes back to the flexibility thing of be flexible. Don't make if your story hasn't been revealed yet, don't force your story. Don't let your story force you to do and this is more than just Hexcrawl. Don't force your story to do anything that isn't right for your game, that you're not ready for as a GM. And if you haven't described the entire country from California all the way to New York, or vice versa, New York all the way to California, and you don't have that stuff ready, and you're not prepped for them, and you don't have tons of interesting things, it's just, you're going to have to go it as you go along, and you're not ready for it, don't do it. Put it somewhere else. Maybe it used to be in fantasy California, but someone else stole it, and they took it to fantasy Albany, upstate New York, if you're not aware, and then they lost it, and now everyone's hunting for it up there, right? You make it work. If you haven't talked about it at your table and it hasn't become part of the established facts of the table, don't let that force you into something. And again, it's not just a hex crawling issue, that's an issue everywhere, but it can definitely affect your hex crawling. Let's see. Nothing says, be flexible. If you can't use something you prep, just save it. Yes. Just save it. I will say that on the just saving it standpoint, I actually had another on the poll. One of my video ideas was talking about quantum ogres. So I don't want to maybe go too deep into it. Wait, one more question quick. John Card, 6 Mile Hex, isn't that the scale used in the expert set for the Grand Duchy? I'd have to look it up. I actually have my expert set somewhere, but it's not in easy grasping. But it might have been. Yes, if you have something that you think is great, feel free to reuse it. I'm sort of torn on the quantum ogring thing, and like I said, I will. And if you're not familiar with the quantum ogre term, it's sort of a play on the obviously quantum mechanical aspect of, like Schrodinger's cat is sort of something is there or not there. It's not really established till you look, right? Is the cat in the box or not in the box? It's kind of both until you look in the box, and then it's there or it's not. The quantum ogre is in the same way. If you have an encounter, it can kind of be there in your toolkit, and you're not really establishing if it's there and wherever it is until you've kind of locked it in. That probably sounds worse or more confusing than I want to be. Essentially, let's say you have two doors and you plant and you have an ogre encounter. You as a GM, according to this, right, is the idea is that you have two doors. You have an ogre encounter that you want to run. you could, before the party has really done anything, they haven't done any kind of investigations. It's two, as far as I know, two blank doors. Essentially, the ogre encounter could be behind either door. It's not established. These doors are, in a sense, right, like the same as the cover of the box. Once the party actually takes action and you then establishes something reality about it, then it kind of locks into place which door the ogre is behind. So say the party goes to the door on the left and does some investigations, and then they see that there's scratch marks, there's a stinky smell and other things that indicate ogre presence, then okay, now the ogre's there, right? Or if they've done something else, it's not there. And then the fact is that if you have this ogre encounter that you love, now okay, they don't choose that ogre encounter, they do something else, you can basically move that ogre encounter somewhere else. It goes back in that kind of quantum state. It's not locked in. They didn't do anything. So maybe they saw a scratch mark, whatever, but they don't go to that door. They don't open it, so they don't get the ogre encounter. Then those scratch marks can be something else, and then the ogre encounter can be moved. I'm probably not doing a good job explaining that, but essentially it's that you can reuse modules of content that you have. And I don't mean module and adventure module. I mean like a modular piece of an encounter. If they don't experience it, you can move it basically somewhere else until they experience it. So if I made this badass ogre encounter and they didn't go in the door that has it, I can just keep that in my bank and pull it out somewhere else. Why? And it's why it's become popular as a concept is because it's, you're being efficient with your time. If you're creating encounters, they're not wasted. The ogre encounter is not trapped behind that door, and because the party never encountered it, it's lost. I can just put it up and put it behind a different door somewhere else, right? Oh, good, I'm saving time. I think why some people don't like it is because it can feel like you're losing some of that agency, that choice. If I decide, and I'm trying to think, there was a good example of it in a book I read. It was about adventure writing and had something like, well, if they go down the left path and then they didn't encounter the wolves that were on the right path, just put the wolves in front of them. And that just drove me nuts because if I've done all my stuff, I have a ranger in the party and the ranger's gone down and sniffed the ground and checked the tracks, seen wolf tracks. So we do the smart move, which is take the other path. Our reward for that should be bypassing the wolves, not that the wolves then show up somewhere else. Same thing, right? The ogre at the door, we see the scratch marks, the smell. We don't know it's an ogre, but we know it's something bad. So we avoid that door. To me, it's like, well, what did I avoid that door for if it's just going to be down in, if you're just keep putting doors and putting ogres behind doors until we open the door and get the ogre room, then what's the point? Why, we should just have not have just we should have just eaten that door, the ogre encounter, at first, just gotten it out of the way. But I will go in that in any different thing. But I do think it's something you have to be careful about. I like to think about it that if the party starts to take traces of, John Corey found out. Yes, on page X60, the X% 6 miles per hex. Yep. I like 5 or 6 miles per hex. I think it's just a nice number. It gives you good working distances. I like the fact that they kind of, 1 or 2 hexes a day for walking, depending on your terrain, is a good number. I like it. But yeah, you can use, that's another thing. You can use whatever hexes you're most comfortable with. But I think most people gravitate to 5 or 6, 6 mile hexes. Anyway, the quantum ogre thing, I just think that if you're going to be moving your counters around, just be really mindful of the actions your party has taken and and honoring those actions, right? So if you'd put, you put a water horse in a pond and the party kind of detected it and decided we don't want to deal with this water horse, so we're going around it, then I think you are not honoring their decisions if you then take that water horse because you like that encounter and plunk it later on in a different body of water or in a stream or somewhere else. Because they made choices. They saw something and they decided to interact with it or not. I think you should honor that choice. But in general, if it hasn't come out in the world yet, yeah, feel free to make stuff and keep it in your bank, right? Use note cards, use an app, wherever you want to kind of make notes. If you have interesting ideas, you can write them out on your random encounter table. Right, a random encounter table doesn't have to be just a monster. It can be. Some people like to do combinations, right? There might be, I'll roll twice and say, oh, there's this monster in this circumstance with another monster potentially. Lots of things you can do to get the most out of your content. I guess part of what I like is to keep things simple. I don't don't think of my encounters as precious. So I haven't put a lot of myself in them, and therefore I don't feel bad if they're, if they don't get utilized. Like if that mound, it was like cool, and then the crocodilian creatures I talked about earlier, and that would have been great if they hadn't used it. Now I have kind of that its own monster, so maybe they would come up across another one of those or something similar because those monsters now exist in my world. But I'm not going to force it on them. Oh, John Carter says, well, it's back to work time, so have a great rest of your day. Thank you, John Cartwright. Yeah, I only have a few minutes left, so if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, so let me just, I guess maybe just to put a bow on talking about interesting hexes, right? We want to, don't force them into a certain block of time. If you don't have the content for it, go with the content, not with some meta construct of how much time you have. Make sure that you have interesting things to talk about in your setting. If it works for you, lean into the stuff with the 5 senses and getting into those details and stuff about your world building. This is where you get to reveal these things about your setting. You've given places cool names, and those names hopefully speak about some truth about that place. This is where you get to reveal those truths to the party. But also think about your setting in terms of, is it appropriate? If I'm in a crowded area, then it should feel crowded. If I'm in a lonely area, it should feel lonely and sparse. So keep everything in terms of what matches your setting. Go small. Don't go big because you think you have to. Don't go big because you want to be epic. If you keep playing, the game will get epic of its own accord as your players continue to get stronger and they unlock new abilities. The breadth of where they can go will just keep increasing with them. The foes that they will encounter will increasing with them. Don't feel like you have to create your own sort of Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings scale Middle Earth with details everywhere. Tolkien worked on that stuff for decades and decades and decades. Don't feel like you have to do that. Start small. Remember that even a 6-mile hex has a ton of room to explore in there. Go with what you can make interesting at a scale that you can do it, and stick with that. Use all the tools that you have at your disposal. I will dig up some of the tools that I use, and I will put them in the show notes probably this afternoon sometime once I finish this up. Use whatever those, come up with the tools that you want, right? That's kind of part of the whole thing with hexcrawling is you invest time at the front at building all your tools, and that way afterwards you don't have to spend any time on it. And then hopefully that means you're spending all the time on the end results of the travel and things, so you don't get caught where you're not ready for the party to get to a destination, so you're trying to slow them down. I think part of what keeps hexcrawling interesting is the fact that you don't know what's going to happen. It can be quick, and then it can be, oh gosh, horrible things are happening, and then fast again. I don't think you want to feel like a plod. And part of that plod is when you start thinking, I got to make rules for stuff. I got to have an encounter every hex, or every so often I got to do something. It just ends up that rote nature. It's going to feel rote. It's going to feel like a monster quarter or a railroad or something where it's just like, oh, it's just encounter after encounter after encounter. So relax, deep breaths, practice your kind of improving a little bit. Don't worry if it takes 10 minutes or it takes 10 hours. Just focus on the stuff that's interesting to you, that you hope will be interesting to your players, right? Your session 0, you've hopefully talked to them about it. Have multiple conversations with them about it throughout your gaming campaign. Hey, you guys still cool with this? Do you want to do it? Do it. Do it. You guys cool with this? We want to do it. Keep doing it. If you're not cool with this, what else can we come up with? Because yes, despite all the ways we want to make these living, breathing simulations worlds, it is a game, right? Role-playing game. Part of the game is we want it to be fun. We want it to be plain. We want to maintain the fun. We want to keep it fun. That's kind of right. If we talk about being interesting, we're really talking about how can you keep it fun. So roll with it. Anyway, I got to run. I got places to go. I got things to do. I'm sure everybody else does too. I've rambled long enough. If you enjoy these, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. I will be closing down that contest in a couple of days as I figure out how to get all the emails into a spreadsheet that I can roll some random number generation on. So if you haven't joined the Bent Worlds newsletter, if you haven't become a Patreon subscriber. Do one of those two things, and you will be in the running for a copy of Worldographer, Hexographer 2. That's all I got for now. Game on. I'll talk to you later.